Hey guys, welcome to today's show. So I have a very special guest on, and he's a very good friend of mine. His name is Ben Jeffery. Now, I can't say for sure whether Ben is a natural born leader because number one, I didn't know him as a kid. But number two, I believe that the most important leadership traits can be cultivated and learned through deliberate development. And so, I'm not sure about the concept of a natural born leader. But what I can say is that the leadership that Ben displays in his church and in the wider communities that he's a part of certainly points to a man who is confident in his influence and his calling. So I first got to know Ben as the leader of one of our Ivy Church sites. And I recognized his gifts as a speaker and just this powerful deliverer of God's message. We haven't shared as many coffees or beers as I would have liked in recent years, because I would have loved to learn from you and just to be influenced by just being around you. So definitely let's change that going forward, Ben, considering we just live like a couple of miles apart. Ben is the kind of guy who he takes faith-based risks for the sake of the bigger vision that he has, and it's great to have him on. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you.
So let's go straight in. Ben,
yeah.
Could you share maybe some of the significant things that have happened in your life that you feel has really shaped you to become the man and the person that you are today?
Yeah. What a huge question to start from, right?
Easy your way in.
Yeah, let's make sure there's no small talk. Let's just jump straight in. What was the most significant moments of your life? I think whenever normally people approach these questions in a very different way. That's quite blunt, but the answer I normally get to, I can probably jump straight to, which is the moment that I knew I was going to be a church planter. And there was this one moment when I was 18 years old that literally changed the entire trajectory of my life. And it's a really bizarre, unusual moment in that I wasn't a Christian, I didn't believe in God, and I was in the middle of a huge row with my dad. And I remember it really, really clearly because I'd just been sacked from my part-time job. That morning, I'd been told I was probably going to get kicked out of college. And my dad turns around to me and he said, so I don't know, something really dramatic, you used to have dreams, you used to have plans, what are you doing with your life? And the moment he asked me that question, I had this picture that came into my head that was so vivid that I've never forgotten it. And I saw a picture of a church that was wide, but it wasn't deep. It was full of flags from all around the world. And in a moment, I knew that those flags represented churches that I'd sent and planted from the church that I was leading. I was there at the front preaching, and I was the church leader. And there was 2,000 people in the room. And I remember bursting out laughing. And my dad was like, what, this isn't a joke, this is serious. And I was like, no, it is a joke. Because I didn't tell him in that moment that was what I was then going to be doing, but there was something about that moment that kind of felt true to myself. And so in a strange way, I knew I was going to be a church leader and a church planter before I even believed in God. And that then, I think after that, I was on borrowed time, perhaps with faith. I ended up finishing that argument. And my dad said to me, come home by midnight or don't come home. So I just walked out the house and didn't come home for 8 months, and ended up going from there and lived on the streets for a little while. I had nowhere to live, nothing to do, but just too much pride to go home to my dad. And then after about 8 months, I decided to go back and say sorry. And about a year later, I became a Christian. And the moment I became a Christian, it was like, I know where all of this is heading. There's going to come a day when I'm going to be planting this church, leading this church. It's going to be 2,000 people. It's going to be wide, whatever that means. It's not going to be too deep. And there's going to be all of these other churches that have been planted out from them. And I think that moment really did set the trajectory for everything that's come after. And so I was 18 years old when that happened, and I first planted a church when I was 36. So there was an 18-year wait in the middle. But I'd say that was probably one of the most defining moments of my life.
That's pretty defining, Ben. That is, very vivid as well. So I'm going to go back to that.
Mm.
Can I ask, what was it like up to the point of 18 years old for you?
Okay, so I'm one of 6 kids, 5 boys, and very competitive because I'm one of 5 boys, and I don't know, you can be one of 5 boys and not be competitive. And I think, like, I always say I'm the oldest of the young ones. So I come in number 4 in the pack. And I think that shapes you a little bit. Like, I was always quite driven to be better than my brothers at just about everything, which was impossible because my brothers are literally brilliant. Like, they're some of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life. And so I always wanted to beat them, but went to a really good school, got a scholarship, and just had really pretty much the best childhood you could imagine until I got to about 13. And because I'm one of 6 kids, we didn't have much money, and so I went to a prep school, but I got the scholarship because we couldn't afford it. Then to go to the next school, I'd have to get another scholarship again, and so the kind of the days at the prep school I was at were arrive at school 8:15 in the morning, leave about 9 o'clock at night. Like, it was a full day, and then in all of my free periods and breaks, I would be studying extra for the exam so that I could try and get this scholarship for the next school. And I remember going into the exams, did my best, did everything that I could. And then afterwards they said, we don't have much money this year for scholarships, so the best we can offer is a 50%. And which still works out at like something like $5,000 a term, which was too much for my mum and dad to afford. So I then ended up going from this kind of really intense, focused academic environment into the local secondary school. And I look back, and that was like the moment I stopped trying at anything. It was like I no longer studied. That was the last time I did homework, and I just cruised through my GCSEs. And I look back as well, and I think that moment was where I realized, like, it didn't matter how hard I tried. It didn't matter how hard I worked. Some things were just never going to happen. I was never going to get what I wanted, and there were things outside of my control. And I think I was quite resentful that my teachers had made me work for something which was actually impossible. I couldn't have ever got the scholarship because it didn't exist. And that then became a moment, I think, where I just lost interest in everything that wasn't about me. And so I decided, like, I was just going to build my life my way around the things that made me happy. And so then I was like 14, got into, the things that 14-year-olds want to get into, girls and drinking and drugs and all of that stuff. And that kind of led to that moment where 4 years later, I was in trouble with the police, looking like I might end up getting arrested. Even going to prison was kind of really realistic at that time. I was in just so much trouble everywhere I went, fights and like gangs and just silliness.
Wow.
And then just ruin it for my family as well. I kind of became I was kind of like, just, there's a song, which is actually by Bon Jovi, which is really embarrassingly awkward. In it, he says, "If life's nothing but survival, how can I believe in sin?" And I think that's what I took on. Like, if life is actually just about me, well, let's live this out to its fullest. And so I was like, if I can get something that I want, then it's my responsibility to get it. And that was how I lived. And so I worked out afterwards, like, when me and my mum and dad sort of sorted out our relationship, I worked out like I must have stolen about 18 grand off them just in my teenage years. And that was just off my mum and dad, but I was like robbing shops and selling alcohol, and I had these kind of dodgy little businesses on the side to try and get in money. And it was just whatever I wanted in that instant. That was kind of how I lived. And there was actually this moment, this is after the conversation I'd had with my dad. There was this moment I was in a subway, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was walking home. I'd had a lot to drink that night, and there was a guy in the subway, and he was like, "Oh, do you want a joint?" So I was like, "Yeah, sounds really, really good." And he pulls out a bag of like white powder, and he starts cutting it up, and I'm holding out my hands to kind of hold the Rizzlers. He's putting these kind of King Ale Rizzlers into my hand. I'm holding it, and I look up, and I see these 2 policemen walking down with an Alsatian. But I'm really drunk, so I can't think straight. So I said to him, I turned around to my friend and I was like, look, I'm really, really drunk, but is that 2 policemen walking towards us? And he doesn't say anything. And I look back at him and he's legged it, he's gone. And then I look down at my hands and he's just dropped all of his drugs into my hands. I was like, I am in real trouble right now. And so I thought, if I throw it on the floor, they're going to find it. So I put it into my jacket pocket and turned around and legged it. I get about 50 meters down the road, and a car jumps up onto the curb, jumps out with a truncheon, and throws me over the bonnet, handcuffs me. And I look up, and I see my mum and dad's pastor's house right there. And I was like, they're going to be so ashamed of me. But so there's this moment, I'm in handcuffs, and the guy is searching me and saying, "What were you doing?" And I said, "Oh, we were just going to have a joint," and I kind of didn't say what was going to be in it. And he said, "Were you in the school that was just around the corner? It's been robbed tonight." And I was like, "Nothing to do with that. We're just in the wrong place at the wrong time." But he's putting all these things out of my pocket, and I'm thinking, oh no, any minute he's going to go in and he's going to pull out all of these drugs. And he went into that pocket which had them, and he pulls out the Rizzler, and then he doesn't go back in. He doesn't check. It's like the one pocket, he pulls everything out except for the drugs. And then he says to me, "Go home and just think about your life." And I remember going around the corner and putting my hand in, and it was just full of drugs, and I couldn't work out how was it that he hadn't found them and arrested me for it. So I threw them all down the drain, and I went home, and I sat in my bedroom that night, and I just sat there, and this question went round my head again and again and again, and it was, what's the point of you? Like, why do you deserve air? Why do you deserve life? What's the point of your existence? Why are you here? And I remember thinking about it. Literally all night I was up just thinking about it, and I couldn't find an answer to that question. And I was like, if my life is just about feeding myself, then there is no point to me. I'm just a vacuum for everything around me, and I have no purpose. And it was that was the moment in that bedroom where I said, there has to be something beyond myself to make this life make sense. There has to be more. And I prayed this really strange prayer. I had a little bit of understanding of faith and belief. And I said, look, God, I believe that you're not interested in action so much as you are in heart. And so I said, I don't have any intention of changing my actions. But if you could come inside me and change me on the inside, then I would give you everything. And so I said, so this is the deal. I'm going to give you permission to come inside me. And if people can notice that I'm different, but my actions aren't different, then I know that the only difference could be you. It's like a scientific experiment. The only variable in my life is going to be the permission I give God. And so that was it. That was it. Just one night, one prayer. And it was a really awkward prayer. It was like, dear Jesus, who I don't know if you exist or if you don't exist. If you do exist, presuming you may exist, this is the deal I want to make. And that was it. And then literally I did nothing different. I kind of went back out the next day and was exactly the same. And I remember like 9 months later, my mum came up to me and she was like, Ben, you've changed so much. And I was like, what are you talking about, Mum? I was like, you don't even know what I did this morning. And she was like, you have just changed so much. What is it? What's happened? I said to her, I've become a Christian. And that was the moment then. The next day I went to church, put my hand up, said, I want to follow Jesus, quit drugs, quit messing about with girls, quit drinking, quit everything. And 2 weeks later, I accidentally became a youth worker. So that was kind of how it went.
Always happens by accident, doesn't it?
It does. So that was kind of what my life was like really up to that point.
Wow, that's quite a journey, Ben. And so was this after your 8 months in the wilderness, or before that, or during?
So that moment was right at the end of it. So I'd just come back home to my mum and dad's. They said to me, you can come back home if you apologize to the whole family. And if anyone says no, you're not allowed back, which was really humbling. And they were all like amazing. They were like, oh yeah, come. We've been worried about you. So I came back. This was maybe this was like 4 months, 6 months after that.
Wow. That's kind of blown me away a little bit, Ben, because I didn't know that. I've known you as the leader of the church. I didn't know your backstory. So to hear that, then to think, wow, that's a proper 180-degree turnaround, isn't it?
Yeah, it was.
I would love to ask, like, how's the relationship with your family and with your siblings now?
Yeah, amazing. Great relationship with my family. And yeah, I mean, just looking back as well, like it could have just been a non-relationship today. And it's one of those things where I look back, and I think the amazing thing with my faith is I have no illusion about where my life would be like if I hadn't met Jesus, if I hadn't had that moment. I know exactly where it would have been. And so when I look at my family, when I look at my wife and my kids now and everything that I have around me, it's like, it's black and white. The contrast is so stark. And I find that really helpful, actually.
And so you are a church leader now.
I am.
And so what was the journey then from that turning point, you reconciling, going back home, becoming a Christian youth worker, to now, what's that been like for you?
Yeah, that's been a journey as well. I became, as I say, a youth worker by accident. Didn't mean to. I was just hungry to know who Jesus was. So I stood up at church and I said, hey, I'm going to be reading the Bible on Saturday night. Who wants to read it with me? And all the youth turned up. And I was like, oh, wait, you're expecting me to teach you something? Like, I've been a Christian 2 weeks. So then just started reading the Bible with the youth. And I think that straight away there was this thing inside me that was, I want to help people not make the mistakes that I made. That was really as simple as it was. I just looked at all of the things that I felt like there's, maybe they're not ever articulated explicitly, but culture speaks a lot into our lives about our expectations. And I'd swallowed everything that it had to say. And I wanted to help people to recognize some of the lies before they ended up in the situations that I'd found myself in. And that was really what my focus was for maybe the next 5 years. It was just, how do I help people who are going to end up in these situations? But all the way through, there's this seed of, I want to be a church planter. I feel like I've got this end destination that I'm going to get to. And then I met my wife while I was a youth worker, and we got married. And there came this moment where I felt like, now's the time. Now's the time that I transition out of youth work and I move into church leadership. And I prayed a prayer and I said, God, anywhere in the world that you want to send me except Manchester, and I'll go there. And that's probably the quickest way to go to Manchester, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so there was this, so I was like, okay, anywhere you want to send me. And I actually had this job interview in Chesterfield, and it was for an associate pastor job. And the night before, I was praying and I was planning and I was trying to think through all the questions that they might ask me and that I might ask. And as I was thinking about it, I just started thinking about Manchester. And I started imagining, I mean, particularly like young adult students and 20-somethings, like who were just like on fire, who were just going for it, who were passionate, and people whose, I just kind of really, really clearly saw people whose lives were like alive, like vibrant. They were really, really living life to the full. And I saw them just like bold and going for it and trying to reach people and make a difference. And I just got so excited. And so the next morning, Emma woke up and I was like, oh, I think we need to go to Manchester, because I'm just so excited for this. And that was it, really. That was as much as I had, this kind of idea while I was preparing for the other job. I went for the interview and turned them down on the spot. And I was like, great interview. No, thank you. We're actually going to Manchester. That didn't go down well at all. If I was going to do that again, I'd maybe let them not offer me the job. Rather than that kind of arrogant, like, oh yeah, I'm rejecting you. But we then, literally both of us resigned our jobs, and I handed in my notice, and 3 months later we had about $3,000 in the bank and a dog and not much else. And we moved up to Manchester, and we'd found somebody who, they were in Africa for 2 months, so we had a house to stay in for 2 months, and we were like, right, we're going to Manchester to plant a church, let's go. And so we got to Manchester, and I think, like, you know, Strengths Finder, like Marcus Buck and all of that. I sometimes think about, what are my strengths? I think one of my strengths is naivety. Like, I'm really blessed with naivety. If I really thought things through, then I maybe wouldn't make all the decisions the same way. But there's like this incredible thing about not overthinking stuff and then just jumping into what's maybe slightly naive situations that I think has been one of the greatest aspects of my life. And so I had this kind of naivety that I was like, maybe I'll get to Manchester and I don't know, I'll walk into a pub and there'll be half a dozen people sitting at a table going, oh, if we just had a leader, then we could plant this church. And I would arrive and go, it is I. I am here. Let's go. Let's plant this church. And so that was what I imagined. Well, it never happened. But I was there, and I think, like, I just had my ear open, and I was like, God, who are the people who I'm going to do this with? And it was really weird, because I find it quite easy to hear God's voice. Like, I find it quite easy to discern what I feel like He is leading to me in my life. But the moment I arrived in Manchester, it felt like I was suddenly completely on my own. Like, I prayed and prayed and prayed, and it was like nothing. And it was the most isolating and alone I think that I'd ever felt since I became a Christian.
Sure.
And I was like angry. I was like, God, I've moved to Manchester. Where are you? Why are you speaking to me? And I now say to people, if you're struggling to hear God's voice for a prolonged period of time, pay attention to the next thing He says, because it's probably going to be very important. He probably really wants you to hear what He's going to say next. And I went to a church, and the leader of the church said, oh, I've got like a prophetic word that I feel is for somebody. And my heart started pumping, and I was like, I really think this is going to be for me. And he said, there's a bamboo where you plant the seeds, and for 6 years you see absolutely nothing, no growth whatsoever. It's all beneath the surface. And he said, then overnight, 48 hours, it grows like 30 feet. And he described it and said, you can walk through a forest and literally watch the bamboo grow around you. It's an urban myth. It's a beautiful picture. It's not true, but it still was meaningful. And he said to me, God's going to keep His promises for you, but you have to learn to wait. And I remember sitting in this church, and in my head, I'm swearing at God. I'm like, I've left my friends. I've left my job. I've left my security. I've left my family. And I'm miles away from everywhere I know. And what, you want me to wait? Like, tell me to be bold. I can do that. Tell me to be courageous. I'm fine with that. Tell me it's going to be hard, but you're going to persevere and it'll be all right. Tell me that it's anything, but don't tell me to do nothing. Like, that's the hardest and the worst thing you could possibly tell me. And then I was like, the Bible says that a day is an eternity in the eyes of the Lord. So I was like, 6 years. That's a metaphor, right? That has to be a metaphor. I was like, well, maybe 6 years means 6 weeks. Maybe I have to wait 6 days. Is that it, Lord? Are we waiting 6 days? Is that what you mean? I didn't feel like it was. I was furious. I was so angry. And I couldn't get a job. I couldn't find any work, and I was applying everywhere, and I was just getting pushed back. And then I was more frustrated, and we got to the point where we had enough money in our savings to last, I think it was like 2 more weeks. And then we were out. We had no more plan. And it was at that moment I got offered a job for a mission charity, and the job was to train up missionaries who wanted to go out and serve overseas, and to take teams all around the world and to lead mission trips. And it was just the most incredible job, like absolutely phenomenal. And it just really, it was my skill set, you know. It allowed me to really get involved in practice, like mission work. It allowed me to practice teaching people and discipling people. I'd go around churches all around the country and preach on what it looks like to follow Jesus into some of the hardest places in the world. I had trips to places where, you know, like I remember one trip I went to, we had to pull down shutters in a shop because there was an angry mob that went past looking for Christians to set on fire. And they were like, it was like crazy but incredible. But in the middle of all of it was this burning frustration where I was like, I'm here to plant a church. And every year I'd get to this point where it was like the frustration was too much. And I'd argue with God, and I'd pray and I'd be like, God, I don't even want to do something bad. I'm not asking here to go off and have affairs or something. I want to go and plant a church, because I just genuinely believe that the churches are where people are going to meet you. They're going to be where people are going to be able to grow to their fullness. That the church done right, I genuinely don't think there's anything better in our civilization than a church when it's at its most healthy. It transforms everything around it.
And let me ask you, that's really, and I just want to ask, because that the church planting vision that you had received at the age of 18 really stuck with you, right? That was the almost driving force that propelled you on that path. And so it's the same God that gave you that vision as the one who is telling you to wait and go to Manchester. So how did you work that out, that he's telling you these things, but then you're like, that thing as well, that thing hasn't come to pass yet, but there's the frustration there. How do you reconcile that?
Yeah, well, I think in the middle of it, I didn't reconcile it. I think that's why I was so frustrated, because I was like, exactly that. You are the one who has told me to do this, and now you're the one who's telling me not to do it. Like, I thought you were unchanging. Make your mind up. Like, this isn't helpful for me. And then I would go to seminars, and everyone would seem to say the same thing, which is, if God tells you to go now, straight away, go for it. And I was like, I want to. He won't let me. And then people would say things like, oh, if you look at trajectories of businesses and organizations, the younger that the leader is when they start, the higher the trajectory and the more they come. And I was like, I wish I could start. I'm just waiting. And I remember praying to God and saying, look, I believe you're gracious. I believe you're good. And I also believe that if I just disobey you and plant this church anyway, that you'll bless it. And then I felt like God said to me, yeah, I'm gracious. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I would bless it. Don't do it. And so then I'd say, okay, I won't do it. And I waited another year, and this would be like an annual cycle. And there came this point where I said, look, I'm not going to just wait and do nothing. That makes no sense. And so I was like, how do I sharpen myself the best that I can now, so that whenever it is that God says to go, I'm ready. That he doesn't say go and I'm suddenly like scrambling to get my act together, scrambling to get some ideas. I was like, I'm going to use this time to study, to research, to hone all of my skills, so that I can literally be like all of my muscles engaged, so that when I get that pistol, I'm off like a shot, and we're just going to go for it. And there's going to be no looking back, no regrets. We're just going to be like a bat out of hell. Maybe it's a bad expression, but you know what I mean? Like we're going to be gone. And so that was what I then started to do, started to study theology, started to just serve as much as I could in my church in any way that they would have me. I was just like, use me for anything. I didn't think that there was a bad experience that I couldn't learn from. You know, you can learn as much from serving coffees as you can from leading worship or from preaching. There's really important lessons in all of these areas. So I was just like, I give myself to my church, and I do as much as I can. And this cycle happened for 6 years. And there came this day when I was praying, and I felt like I prayed and God said, okay, you can now go. And I was like, wait. And you know when it's like, I don't know, when you get what you've been waiting for so long, I was like, I don't even know if I can go like this. And I finally got it here, and I now move forward. And I felt in that moment, I felt like God said, you can now plant the church, or you can do this other thing. And I was like, okay, forget the other thing, whatever that is, I'll plant the church. So I went straight to my church leader, and I said to him, can you please go to the elders and say, Ben wants to plant the church, and just see what they say. And let's work out what this looks like. So as he's going, like, he probably had like 2 days between that meeting. In those 2 days, I'd found a venue. I'd already worked out a core team. Like I had everything ready to go. I already had like 20 people who were ready to start this church with me in that moment. And he came back and he said, and I was like a puppy, you know, I was like, what did they say? What did they say? What did they say? And he said, I didn't ask them. And I was like, you don't know how long I've been waiting. Why did you not ask them? Like that is really, that's just really unfair. And he said, look, he said, we are a close network of churches, and we're growing, and we've got this vision to be a multiplying church. And for that to happen, I need to step out from my local context so that I can invest in the leaders. And that's going to then create a vacuum. And so we've been asking ourselves who in the church could step into that space. And he said, I keep coming back to you. I'd like you to think about whether you want to apply to lead the church that you're in. Now, this is a church of like 500-600 people. It's where my family is. It's where my friends are. And I don't think I've ever known any other church leader who can say that their first experience of stepping into church leadership was leading a church of 500 or 600 people. Like that just doesn't happen, right? That was crazy. And so then me and my wife, we went away and we prayed about it, and I was like, this must be the other thing. And so we came back, and we were like, of course we'd love to do this. This is amazing. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity that is a bit like if you're a football fan and then your football team ask you to play for them. That's what it felt like. I was like, I'm a Forest fan. I'd be like, wow, I get to play for the Reds. It was incredible. And then the welcome from the church was phenomenal as well. It's like people, I think perhaps because we'd been there already and people knew us, and I was already serving a lot and preaching a lot, there was this established context, but I was stepping into some huge shoes, but people just gathered around us and supported us. But the craziest moment was we had this day when they were going to pray for us to become the leaders of the church. And on the Thursday before, I had a little ping on my calendar, and it said 6-year anniversary in Manchester. And that Sunday was literally the closest possible Sunday to being 6 years in Manchester from when we arrived. And so we then entered into this just beautiful, like golden zone where we stepped into something where there was already so much momentum. There was almost such positive culture. We didn't have to come in and say, right, we're changing everything. It was, right, this is really, really healthy. How do we not mess this up? And what was phenomenal as well was, it was like this context was, there's a support net all around us. And it meant that we weren't afraid of making mistakes, because even if we made the worst mistakes, we knew that there was this incredibly robust structure that was going to catch us and make sure that it was healthy. And I remember there was about 6 months in, even just 6 months of what should have been me playing for my football club, like my dream job, the best thing that I could imagine. it panged again. That thing inside of me that was like, you're supposed to be planting a church. And I was like, oh, what do I do with that? What do I do about that? This is more than I could have. This was probably bigger than the vision I imagined. This feels more like the bamboo just flying up. But it panged, and I heard a story which is so cheesy but really helpful for me at the time. And it was a story of a dad who had two sons. And as he was passing away, he gave each of his sons an apple tree. And he said, I want you to look after these trees. And so the first son, he puts a blanket around it. I don't know. He puts beautiful soil. He waters it. He sings its songs at night. And it bears him the most beautiful fruit. And he enjoys the apples. And he just loves this apple tree. And he spends his life investing in this tree. And it's wonderful, and it's meaningful. And as he gets old, he thinks back to his other brother, and he asks himself, well, I wonder what happened to my brother. So he goes to visit his brother, and his brother invites him in, sits him down on a bench, and he shows him this view of all of these orchards. And he says, the apple tree that our dad gave us is the bench you're now sitting on. And so the older brother's then like, he's angry. He's like, well, how disrespectful. Our dad gave us that tree. How dare you cut it down and turn it into a bench? And he said, no. He said, it's not disrespectful. He said, I love that tree, and I invested in that tree. But then I realized that there was other places where I could plant seeds that would be even more fruitful than here. And so I started to plant more and more seeds everywhere else. And I realized that actually this tree wasn't even in a good spot. So I cut it down so that I could then look out on where all the fruit was. And that this tree now for me symbolizes what I think the Father really wanted to give me. And so for the first son, it was all about the tree. And for the second son, it was all about the fruit. That helped me, because when I was 18 and I had that moment that God gave me that picture, I was only thinking about the church. It was actually really self-involved. I'm going to be a church leader, and I'm going to lead a church that's like this, and I'm going to have this role and this responsibility. And actually it was all about me. And I think that if God had allowed me to plant that church back when I wanted to, it would have been toxic. It would have ended up just being wrapped up in my narcissism and everything that was unhealthy in me. And what God had been teaching me is it's not about me. It has to be about the fruit. It has to be about how we're going to reach people, and what the why is, what the point of it all is. And the point of church planting can never be about the church planter. That's an awful reason to plant a church. It has to be about the fruit. And so we had some of our best friends who said they wanted to go and plant a church. And I remember helping to equip them and helping to send them, and speaking to Emma, and said to her, we might never be the people who get to go and do this, but it's not about us, it's about the fruit. And so if we start leading a church which is going to send people and is going to reach loads of people all over the place, then I can find some peace with that, and I'll be happy with that. And I actually prayed a prayer a little while afterwards, and I said to God, look, I love this church so much. If you ever wanted me to actually go and plant a church, you would somehow have to remove this church from the equation, because otherwise I don't think I could ever leave it. And then, having prayed that prayer at Christmas, 3 months later, the church gets notice from the cinema we're meeting in that they're tripling the rent, and that the venue is no longer tenable. And all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, everything's changed. And because it's this tight network of churches, we were able to find a home in lots of different places for everybody, while we were asking the question, like, what are we going to do with this church? And it was in that moment that I got another pang. that this thing came back into my heart again, and it was like, actually, maybe this is the moment. Maybe this is the time when God is saying, I'm now giving you that opportunity to be able to go, to be able to throw yourself into that thing that you've been thinking about since you were 18. And then that became the moment we went and started the church, which I am now leading.
Wow. So good. And that's incredible insight, because I've been a part of some of that journey, but to hear, I've never heard it from, in quite that way before, and to learn about the things that you were going through personally and your relationship with God, and also with your relationship with Emma, it gives a further perspective to it. It's amazing. And that's the thing, like, perspective is so important, because you just see things from lots of different vantage points, but you also had your own personal experience going through it all.
Yeah.
And so here you are, leading another church, planted a church in a cinema.
Yes.
There's a theme, but it didn't start there. So
more similar to Manchester, I said, you know what we'll never do again? We will never do church in a cinema. So I'm learning
from the first lesson, never Manchester. So actually, I'm curious, why did you say that to God? Why not Manchester?
Why not Manchester? So it was because a year before, my wife's family had all moved up to Manchester, and they're really big personalities. And I think that I just wanted us to start marriage separate to everyone else. It wasn't like I didn't love Manchester. It was just I wanted us to kind of start alone. That sounds really awkward when I say it out loud like that, but it was like I just wanted us to start together. And so the idea of going somewhere where her family already was, it wasn't necessarily like, and looking back, I think there was a whole lot of pride in that too. I think that God's kind of challenged me a lot on that. But that's probably the heartbeat. I wanted us to start just the two of us. I had this kind of romantic idea of just me and Emma against the world, alone. And then when it's hard and we suffer, at least we've got each other. Like, it was that kind of like romantic tale. And then we actually kind of started to suffer and started to struggle and all these other things. And I was like, man, I'm so glad we got family around us. Is that naivety I was talking about?
Yeah. And there's just, there's so much wisdom kind of spilling out of your story here, Ben, being able to look back and connect the dots. And I mentioned that word before, kind of reconciling everything, reconciling the conflict and all these different views, and bringing it all together where you can see that common thread and how everything's mapped out the way that it's meant to be, to prepare you, right? I'm not to say prepare you that you're done. I'm sure you don't feel that way.
I hope not.
Time to pack it in and go home. You're at another chapter now, and it's relatively new. Why not another cinema? I'm just curious.
So the relationship that we had with the last cinema was really difficult.
Okay.
They just made everything hard. Really, I think that for about 2 years before we left, they were trying to make us voluntarily leave. And so I was working with all the teams and just saying, we need to be blameless here. We need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make them happy. But they didn't make it a really positive experience.
And that's a shame, isn't it? Because it's not like you had forced your way in the first place, I assume.
No, exactly. It was complex. There was a manager, I think, who particularly didn't like the idea of having a church community in the cinema. And he'd said no. He then left. A new manager came who liked the idea. He said yes, open arms, welcomed us in. And then right at the time when I started leading the church, they swapped managers back. And so we had the old manager who'd previously said no, he didn't want it, who suddenly finds himself with this church that he never really wanted in a cinema.
Right.
So that was always going to be difficult.
Got it. So, that was an unpleasant experience towards the end. You are in a cinema now.
Yeah.
How's that relationship?
Yeah, amazing. It's absolutely fantastic. They're a different philosophy. So the cinema we were in before was all about, at the end of the day, it was just all about the bottom line, and it was how do we get as many people into as many screens as possible. And the cinema we're in today, they call themselves a sociable cinema. They're far more interested. Obviously they still need to make profit, but they're far more interested in community. They want it to feel like a community space, and I think that they like us being there. and they definitely make us feel welcome and valued. So it's a completely different experience. And actually, in hindsight, is fantastic for us because you can outgrow your venue and move like 10 foot. And then you've got another venue right there ready for you with more seats, bigger capacity. And that's been just really nice. And again, so when we outgrow this venue, we've got a really easy next step just waiting for us. So.
Yeah, perfect. So just upgrading screen 3 to screen 2 to screen 1, and so and I mean that's also just like can be a mind-boggling kind of concept for people who don't normally go to church. You know, that traditional view or perspective of church. You know, an old building with pews, and it's like that type of environment, dust, cobwebs, all that.
Yeah.
You know, you're in a cinema. So what is the vision? How are you using that? How are you optimizing that environment to like achieve your mission?
Yeah, it's interesting you say about it, because right when we started, there was just a few of us and we were looking for venues and everything felt like shut doors wherever we went. And somebody offered us a free church. And it was an Anglican church, and it was big and it was very traditional. And we talked about it and we said, we don't even want it. Like, we don't want a traditional building, because part of what we're doing is trying to break down some of the set thinking that people have about church. I'm quite lucky because I lead a church. It's really easy for me to talk about it. So I'll go to the hairdressers and they'll say to you, what do you do? And I'll say, I lead a church. And they're like, what, you lead a church? Like, I'm like, yeah, I lead a church. And then they say, well, what church do you lead? And I'd be like, oh, the one in the cinema. And then they're like, wait, you lead a church in a, and it straight away starts to make people ask questions. Like, maybe church isn't what I thought it was. And I find that lots of people are open about faith. They believe that there's something out there, that there must be more to life. Like that same experience that I had when I was 19, 20 years old, where I was like, there must be more than just me, that there has to be a bigger purpose. I think that most people experience that. And when you talk to people, I think that most people are quite happy to say that there must be some greater being or something like. There's more agnostics than atheists, is my point. But where the conversation gets tricky is when I bring in the word church. Church are either the people on Facebook with caps lock on all the time, or they're the people who wear cardigans and like tea parties. But either way, they don't have anything to do with my life. And so we have this situation where there's a lot of people who believe in something, they've not worked out what it is, but then when they're looking at faith, they can't find anybody who they could actually explore that with. And so a big part of what we're saying is that we want to be the kind of community that you can just come and explore faith with, and that you feel like we are the sort of people that you could come and be around. And so we're trying to break down some of the traditional mindsets, I guess, around what church has to be, to really bring people to the center of what it needs to be, like the essence, the juice right in the heart, which is all about Jesus. And so I think that really the job of church, there's a story in the Bible which illustrates this just really perfectly, and it's quite a famous story. It's a story of one of his best friends has passed away. He's called Lazarus. And Jesus comes along to the tomb. And what he says is he turns around to his disciples and he says, can you go and move the boulder? So back in the day, they had these huge boulders on the tombs to keep their bodies from being robbed and keeping people out. So they had to push this massive boulder out the way. Jesus then calls out to his friend and says, Lazarus, I would think of it in the old King James, Lazarus, come forth. Like, it's this beautiful moment. And then he comes out like he's raised from the dead. This is phenomenal moment. And then Jesus turns around to his disciples and he says to them, go and remove the grave clothes, like the bandages and all of the dirty stuff that he's surrounded with. And this is the picture of church for me. So our role is to go and remove boulders. We're to get everything out of the way of people meeting Jesus. And so I want to find, if a building is going to be in the way of someone meeting Jesus, I'd rather be somewhere easier, which is why we're in a cinema. If a dog collar is going to be in the way, then I don't need one. If a title calling me reverend or something like that would get in the way. I want to get everything out of the way that I can. If the language we use is in the way, we change the language, because what we want is for people to have a moment with Jesus. And then I believe that that moment with Jesus is what actually changes everything. That's what brings people from dead to life.
Yeah.
But then afterwards, we've still got more work to do. So we then have to help people and say, okay, you're now alive. What are you still carrying that is no longer applicable? What do you no longer need now that you're back alive that actually smells a little bit like the grave? And so we then help wash people, help clean them, help equip them so that they can then live this full life like they were supposed to.
That's amazing. I mean, beautiful picture that you painted there, and I love that analogy. You're bridging the gap, right? You're being in that environment, being in a cinema. It shifts people's misconceptions of what really defines church.
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying. And so you're bridging that gap, you're shifting the misconceptions. And so it's stripping away of those things that people thought church was, to get to the, as you said, the essence of what it really is. That's a relationship with Jesus.
And things like the cinema are really beautiful for it, because people don't realize they've got misconceptions. But when you then have a church in a cinema, it confronts the misconception that they didn't even realize that they had. And that automatically forces a question out of people, which is, well, what is church? And what kind of a person would go to a church in a cinema? Can a church be? It just raises all these questions, which are really, really beautiful questions for people to then be thinking about. And some people get angry. I had one guy who was really angry with me. He was like, how dare you be in a cinema? You need to have an altar, and this stuff is really sacred and it matters, and you need to have all this stuff. And I was like, wow, you really care about church? And he said, yeah. And I was like, well, what church do you go to? And he said, oh, I don't believe in God. And I was like, well, don't try and force me into the box that you've already left. But it provokes something.
Yeah.
Really healthy.
It really does. It really does. And yeah, and getting people to question that, because it's like, oh, I thought going to church meant this. Cardigans meant pews, meant old traditional buildings. And as you said, it forces them to continue to go down that path of questioning to reach some type of resolution. Oh, I thought church was this. This is the reason why I didn't go to church, because I don't want to wear that cardigan. I don't want to, I don't want to drink milky tea, whatever. Strip all that away. Then it's like,
well, I mean, ultimately, in the middle of it, I think that the reason why people don't go to church is because they don't think that they're already there. But when you turn up in church, what you're looking for is yourself. You're looking for people who are the same as you.
Yeah.
So you have this idea that church is angry people, or church is unfashionable people, or church is old people. Whatever that conception is, it's always something other than yourself. And so what we're really stripping it away is saying, actually, you're already there. The people who are in this church are people who are just like you, who dress just like you, who listen to bad music just like you, who watch stranger things. Like, we're the same as you, with the difference that we believe in Jesus. And then that automatically makes a bridge where it makes someone a Christian. They need to go and explore it for themselves. They need to decide for themselves. They need to have that moment with Jesus for themselves. But what it does is, hopefully, it strips away some of the misconceptions that have been standing in their way when they didn't even realize they were there.
Yeah. So good. Ben, I think, we can talk so much more, but we've gone over. I might have to split this into 2 parts.
Sorry.
That's all good. Like, everything you're saying is fantastic. I do want to leave you with one final question. I'm excited to know your answer to this. Taking into account the journey that God's got you on, pulling you back and forth, and you kind of wrestling with all of that. How do you intend to increase your impact going forward?
The answer is by making as many mistakes as I can. I think that's my answer. I think that the reason why our influence and impact is lessened tends to be because of a fear of making mistakes, and not always for a bad reason. Like, I planted a church because, like I said earlier, I love church. Church means something to me. But if I then make church something which has to always be perfect, then I'll stop risking, I'll stop trying new things and innovating, and I'll stop making mistakes. And the moment I stop making mistakes, the church will die, my impact will lessen. And so in order to have a better impact and better influence, and then generally to grow in wisdom as a human being, I'm very intentionally trying to make more mistakes, to fail more, so that I can then see the success that's necessary.
I love that. And I, you know, and I've seen that in you. I've watched you and Emma.
That's a backhanded compliment, I think.
It's definitely a compliment. I know I've seen you and Emma on the journey of how you've grown this church. You know, I was there recently, and I said to you and Emma both individually that it's just amazing as I look around and I see this community that you've built in this town center, or city's town center, and the impact that you've made. And that's from you and Emma, like, jointly making these bold choices. You know, it's faith-based risks that you're willing to take, you know, and you're able to do that because you're secure in the mission. You know, fear can come from a sense of we lose a bit of our identity if we make mistakes and we don't know how to correct it. We're just scared of being wrong.
So I think I've said this to you before, just on a random conversation over a coffee before, but I think that the difference perhaps for a faith-based thing like a church is that I have this underlying belief that no matter what happens, Jesus is for me. So if I take a risk and I fail, I think I've got a safety net. So there isn't a risk that really involves that much fear, because my faith is my foundation. And so there's not really anywhere that it can go wrong. And so we can then just jump straight in and make the best decisions we can. And like, I started without any finances, but that didn't matter, because I had this belief that if it all went wrong, Jesus has got my back. We just continue that at every single step of the way. Let's move to a cinema. We can't afford a cinema. Yeah, but it's okay because we've got Jesus. And if it does all go wrong, he's still got our back. And so because we have that foundation, it's like you said, it's a faith-based risk, which is not so much being brave, I think. It's just about that foundation of believing that Jesus is
confidence.
Yeah, it's confidence. But not even self-confidence, right? It's not confidence that I'm going to have this amazing idea or that I'm the greatest leader ever. I don't think that I am. It's just this confidence that we're trying to do something that we believe is right, and we're going to keep on trying until we get it right. I heard someone say a little while ago that God doesn't use the people who are the most intelligent or the most gifted. He uses the people who don't give up. That's it. If you really believe that Jesus has got your back, you just keep going, you keep trying, and then you get something somewhere.
And it's beautifully encouraging and inspiring to me, for me and my faith, to see you just act that out, you know, on a very regular basis, I would say.
Thank you.
Ben, thank you so much for your time and coming on and just sharing your story. It's just very powerful, and I feel lifted from hearing it. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Andy.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.